So what's your background in all of this? You know, what made you get into radio and podcasting and things like that?
Well, I'll tell you what's crazy is I started out as a nightclub promoter when I was a kid. I mean, I could tell you crazy stories. I'll cliff note some weird highlights.
Do it, yeah.
When I was like 14, I was really into breakdancing, and I was in a breakdancing movie, which is crazy. You know, I was considered one of the best white breakdancers in Brooklyn, which is hilarious. I got involved with the illegal aspect of computers, was wanted by the FBI at 15 for computer hacking, which is also crazy. And then around 16 or 17, I started working in nightclubs as a nightclub promoter for regular mainstream nightclubs, right? And then at some point, I just got obsessed with rock and roll more than a casual fan. And I said, why am I running dance clubs? I'd rather be running rock clubs. And I started running rock clubs around 18 or 19 years old. And the big ones that you would know if you're at least over 35, like L'Amour and The Limelight and the World Stage, where Trickster shot their video 100 years ago. But I became super obsessed with running rock clubs. So we had all these, was doing like 3-4 nights a week. And then in 91, rock changed dramatically. That was my last year of really enjoying it. I was 21. And all the rock clubs started dropping like flies because it wasn't about sex, drugs, and rock and roll anymore. You know, silent plug right there, pun intended. Right. But then it became more about stay at home, do drugs, stare at your shoes, nameless, faceless bands. And it changed the vibe, and all the rock clubs started closing. So I started working in a strip club as a DJ. I knew all the strippers because back in the Limelight days, every stripper within a 50-mile radius would come on Sundays because Guns N' Roses would be hanging out, or Van Halen would be there, or Metallica would be there. So they would come by to meet whoever it was, the hot band of the moment. So when I was looking for a job, the manager of Scores said, you should come work for Scores. You know all the girls anyway. And that's how I started working in strip clubs. Did that for way too long, worked in restaurants for a while. I went to cooking school, ran a restaurant. And then eventually on one of these strip club nights, I was still doing one night a week, I met a guy who was in radio. And we started talking, and I got an audition and started doing overnights, midnight to 6 in the morning, then pitched an idea of I wanted my classic rock on radio. At the time, nobody was playing Guns, Van Halen, Motley Crue, AC/DC on radio. We're talking about 1998. It wasn't being done. I launched a show on a local station in New Jersey. A year later, we started getting syndicated. We moved to the biggest station in New Jersey at the time, which was WDHA. Then we got syndicated, and then 2-3 years later, we're on 10 stations. A few years later, we get up to about 95 stations, and that's what I did for most of my adult life. I was running rock clubs. I mean, a rock show. I had a show on everywhere, became a VG on VH1 Classic for a while, started hosting Shiprocked and the M3 Rock Festival and all these other things, and then rock radio changed, and it became internet. And I learned it from being at the M3 Rock Festival, where it used to be the big local station, and my show was right next to it. It was called the Tour Bus. It was whoever the local show was, and the tour bus was right next to it. And in the back, there's that like radio row. And they just started moving us further and further down the row every year, 4 or 5 years in, to where the fifth year, I'm the last guy. We weren't even in the radio row anymore. We were like on another stage, nowhere. I was like, yeah, this is probably over. This is not going to work for me anymore.
Right.
So we switched about 6 years ago. I started a podcast called The SDR Show, and it just made sense because what guy is not going to click a show called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll? And it just started to grow. And that grew and grew and grew, became #1 in iTunes comedy a couple times. And then we started the network, Gas Digital. Me and Luis de Gomez started about 5 years ago. And now we have 22 shows, a few million listeners a week. And we have studios here in New York, and we're going to open studios in LA soon. It's crazy the way it happened. It really is wild. We just pivoted at the right time.